I'm Michelle Ely from the Starlight Tribune, an Arrow TV show fan podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other amazing geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to episode 222 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we talk to all the people who are considering starting a podcast to get them through the current COVID-19 self-isolation.
In this week's Better Podcasting download, we talk about there being a new exciting update from Rode on the Rodecaster Pro.
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we take listener feedback, including advice that podcasters have for all the folks jumping into podcasting right now.
Lauren, go ahead and jump into the intro right now.
Welcome to Better Podcasting. With a combined history of over 1,000 episodes and starting as early as 2008, we are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast. Here are the hosts for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Welcome to an all-new episode of Better Podcasting. This is episode 222. I am Stephen John Drew, and I am pleased to say that SP is here without beard.
Yes. In addition to it just being that time of year where the beard comes off, it's roughly 1 October through 1 April, and this is the day before 1 April, so it's off. In addition to that, I shaved my beard off in solidarity for all the people working in hospitals and emergency rooms, which cannot have facial hair right now because it doesn't seal the mask just right. You see a bunch of pictures of guys that had these glorious beards on, and they had to shave it off in order to fit within those masks and personal protection equipment. So good on you guys, and I'm there right with you.
This week we have a bit of a fun episode that we want to do because it is an interesting time for lots of people right now. If you're listening to this in the future, we're recording this in March of 2020. You may have heard of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we've got an episode tailored towards people jumping in, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But before we get there, I just want to highlight that at the top of the show, we like to insert a How I Saved My Podcast story. So if you've had something go wrong with your podcast and you fixed it, please send us a video clip or an audio clip. If you want to just send us an email, that's fine as well. And we can share that in the future on how you save your podcast. The intention being, let's support everybody out here. Let's help everybody understand that things go wrong with your podcast and you can fix it. You'll get through it. Just be a little creative. And I know SP, he is one of the most creative people with fixing podcasts because he has to fix my podcast every single week by firing me.
I just fixed Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. this week, by the way, too. And we recorded Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. episode number 325. Haley's computer just died, and we decided to go without her. I had two other co-hosts. I mean, I wanted her back, but if she's not going to have a computer that can actually record, then sometimes the show must go on.
I have been there, and I think we actually had to do an episode of the official Gonna Geek show once where you had something happen with your internet, and we had to go without you. I think that was what it was. It was fading in and out, and maybe it was somebody else, but I want to say there's one episode as well.
It was probably me. I understand my internet issues, and it has nothing to do with me anymore. It's just I've got the best internet that I could have right now, and it's disappointing.
The long story short is SP has basically cursed out every single internet company, so we've had to actually run him a direct line from my house over, so he kind of siphons Canadian internet. That's what it is.
Yeah, we had Forrest Gump take the line and just kept on running with it the entire time. It was really heavy to start out with, too, and it just got lighter as he went along.
So anyway, send your How I Save My Podcast story to us to podcast@betterpodcasting.com. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, for those of you that are listening to this later, we are recording this in March of 2020 when the world has been drastically affected by COVID-19. There are people hunkered down in their houses and they've got a lot of time on their hands. People who were just a few weeks ago out running with running groups are now spending endless amount of times on their living room couch. With people being at home looking for ways to entertain themselves, we've seen a lot of people turn towards podcasting and starting a podcast to fill some of that time. After all, they do have a ton of free time, so why not try something new? But here's the thing. While in the past, we've talked a lot about different recommendations we have for starting a podcast, right now we think things are a little bit different with podcasting endeavors if you are looking to start a podcast to entertain yourself right now. For example, some people that are looking to start podcasting right now are looking to do so right now, not a few months from now. They want to entertain themselves right now. As well, other people who might start a podcast and look to all of the different resources that they have for equipment and other things might not have that same access to resources right now. They may be very limited with what they can do and what they have access to start their podcast. And today we want to talk to these people, talk about starting a podcast under right now, today's conditions, essentially doing it as sort of a short release tool for keeping yourself occupied while you are hunkered down at home during the pandemic. And we want to talk about some of the things that we think you could probably do a little differently compared to all of the other recommendations that we've given in the past. And as well, some of the considerations and cautions that we think are still applicable, and some of the things that we've talked about before that we think are still applicable. And SP, I'll turn it over to you here to kick us all off with some of the considerations and the cautions. After all, I know that your middle name is Caution.
No,
That's
not my middle name
okay.
at all.
Sorry.
As a matter of fact, my middle name might be the opposite of Caution. Anyway, first, let's talk about the fact that podcasting is going to take a lot of time. Even if you have decided not to put in a lot of effort into your podcast, there's still going to be a lot of steps involved with podcasting. At the bare minimum, you have to set up the podcast, both technically and conceptually. You got to record the podcast. You got to produce the podcast, even if it's simply converting to a release format. You have to release the podcast. And most importantly, you got to promote the podcast. So the extent of all this will vary on how much time you place in each of those steps. For example, if you edit your podcast, that's going to take a lot of time, especially if you're not used to it. We've actually gotten a lot of questions from people recently on what DAW do you use? What DAW do you edit in? Where do you edit your podcast? That sort of thing. So I know people are approaching this for the first time. If you spend a lot of time preparing for your episode, that'll add time, but it's going to make for a better episode in the end. I would heartily recommend that you spend a lot of time preparing for your episode that you're recording, right, Steven?
Absolutely. But here's the thing. Even if you decide that you're not going to, you're going to go against that advice and you're going to cut all the corners, well, there's still a lot of different steps involved in this process. But in today's conditions, one of the biggest changes to this whole consideration here is the fact that you have more time right now. We are big advocates of asking yourself how you're going to make the time to podcast if you're thinking about starting a podcast. But the thing is, many people right now have had their schedules come completely clean. They no longer are going to the gym. They no longer have to take their kids to different activities. They are literally sitting at home thinking about all of the ways that they are going to get in and out of the grocery store really quick the next time they go out. So you now have a full schedule of availability. And this is something that we think is worth noting right now, because usually you're trying to figure out how to fit that in, but now you're trying to figure out what you can do to fill the time. It's the opposite. But we do want to mention right now, on these same lines, that there is still mental fatigue involved, and it's a consideration when you are thinking about time, because podcasting can be very draining during a normal time, but right now people are mentally taxed because of the COVID-19 situation, And so you might find, even though your schedule technically is free, it might not feel free because of this mental fatigue. So we think it is worth considering. Just because you have a full schedule doesn't mean that your body's really operating in the same efficiency that it was before. So we did want to mention that right now.
Another important consideration that we think you should have is whether or not you want to consider podcasting when life starts to return back to normal. Depending on how you answer this question will have an impact on how many other things that we're going to talk about in this episode. If you're looking to only do podcasting as a relief project during today's crisis, during your stay-at-home orders, then some of the decisions you'll make will be quite different than if you're going to keep going afterwards. And if you're going to keep going afterwards, then you'll want to put a little more focus on the traditional decision processes and considerations. And Stephen and I were talking before this episode, and we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that we're still advocating everything that we talked about in the previous 221 episodes, is that just right now, for a brief period of time, things have changed in the world, and we're going to recognize it with the rest of the podcast. Of course, another big consideration that you should have, and arguably the biggest, is what your show is going to be about. We could do an entire episode about this. Matter of fact, we did. It's episode 1 of Better Podcasting. Now, it's important that you pick a topic that is near and dear to your heart so that you can motivate yourself to create content that you are passionate about. However, we think that there is a very unique consideration that you should have in today's environment. If you're thinking that you want to do just the podcast during your time at home, then you should pick a topic that you think will be a good short-term project. For example, consider some of the things that might go into a short-run podcast, something with a definite endpoint. And for more short-run podcast tips, check out episode number 195. But if you're considering doing a longer term run and you're just starting the podcast now, you're taking advantage of the time to actually start a podcast, which you have thought that you were going to do for a while now, we think that with all the time at home, you'll have a real good opportunity to refine your craft more than somebody usually would when they're launching a podcast. We'd recommend that you follow our usual recommendations, but take the extra time to prepare yourself better. For example, perhaps you have more time to do some test episodes, try out different themes online, and find one that really fits well for you and your show. You may not be releasing that content, say 1 to 5 episodes, but at least you're entertaining yourself right now and you're making your craft better for when you eventually do start releasing the show.
Another thing that we think is important to consider right now is that podcast consumption is down. We've talked about in the past how the reality is that drawing a podcast to your audience is an uphill battle. It can be really tough to do to build that audience with your podcast. But the thing is, right now, it's important to consider that during this time, there are many trends out there that are supporting that podcast consumption is down across the board. Now, we personally theorize that this is because everyone's routines are really uprooted, and many of the places that people were listening to podcasts before just aren't happening for them. For example, commutes to and from work. Lots of people are working at home, or maybe they're not going and working out where they used to. So really, you shouldn't be starting a podcast, especially right now, with the intention of becoming famous. No, the odds are stacked against you for those. So you really want to make sure that you go into things with a clear idea that growing an audience will be hard. So no matter what the reason is, the bottom line is that you should be aware that drawing listeners to your podcast is extra hard right now. It's important that you consider this and know that you may only have a few friends listening, but do it for yourself and do it for those few friends. That's not to say you shouldn't be creating a podcast. It just means that if you are going to start a podcast, really make sure you're doing this truly for yourself and maybe those few friends. As two proud hobby podcasters, we are big advocates of making podcasts for your own personal desires. Do it for yourself.
And the last big consideration that we want to mention right now is whether or not you even want to make the podcast public. This is not something we mentioned in the past because generally people who create a hobby podcast are wanting to share it with others. But things are different right now. Some people are doing projects just to keep themselves busy while they're at home. And this just isn't even with podcasting. For example, I have been doing some things around the house that I just didn't think I'd be doing right now, like cord management on entertainment centers.
Oh, I saw the video. That was an uphill battle in itself.
Oh my gosh, that was a mess.
You know, one example that I actually heard recently was somebody who decided that they wanted to write a book right now. They're at home and they thought they were going to write a book because it's always been a desire of theirs. They're not going to publish it. They're not going to become an author. They have no desire. They've made it very clear. They're just doing it to entertain themselves and as a bit of a thought exercise right now. Podcasting could very well be the same thing for you. It might be something that you're looking just to keep yourself busy, and that's totally okay if that's the case. Essentially, you might just want to keep that to yourself or keep that to a select group of people. That's totally fine. And if it gets you through, it gets you through. It's okay if you don't want to make that public, but we encourage you to. Let others listen if you really want to, but it's okay if you don't want to. Now let's talk a little bit about some ways that you can make podcasting easier, because there are some things that we want to talk about right now that you might want to try to make the whole process easier if you are just doing this as really an exercise to keep yourself busy during the current conditions. And let's start with an area that I know FP loves to talk about. It's gear.
We have made it no secret that we think that with podcasting, you should invest in a half-decent microphone to make your podcast sound decent. You shouldn't spend much money as you're just starting out. Who knows how long you're actually going to be podcasting, but there are still a few good options. For example,
I love it. It's good for Samson. I'll just, here, since we're switching to this, I'll just go ahead and get this one ready right now.
Okay.
I'll pull this off so we can tell.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
For example, the Samson Q2U, and it is a wonderful microphone, wonderfully priced, and definitely think you should get one if you are starting a podcast for the long term. However, right now, you might not have the ability to go get a microphone. Stores are closed. Usually fast shipping vendors like Amazon may be weeks behind. Maybe some other vendors like Sweetwater. I ordered something from that last week, and as soon as I ordered something from them, they sent me an email saying, we're closed. You'll have to get your gear later. You may just have, it may just not be feasible. Sorry.
Go ahead.
It may just not be feasible to get yourself a half-decent microphone right now. So what are you going to do? Additionally, right now, the quality exceptions are not very high for internet content by the general.
I'll get you to say that again. You said quality exceptions. So did I mistype expectations?
Let me take a sip of coffee.
No worries. You know what happened? It's because you podcasted with the big Discovery personality, famous Cody Goff last night. You're just still flustered by that. So tie in for the Good and Geek show.
It's true. It's true. Okay. But additionally, right now, the quality expectations are not very high for internet content by the general public. As big personalities are doing programs at home, sometimes on their phone, the bar seems to have been lowered for what is being produced on the internet right now during this COVID-19 crisis. There are many broadcast shows like late night shows and daytime talk shows, and even news broadcasts that have turned to at-home productions that in all truthfulness pale in comparison to the standard that has been largely established by podcasters and YouTubers everywhere, this program being no exception. Many of those shows are using bad lighting, bad audio, and bad production just to get a product out. So if you're starting a podcast just to get you through for a while, right now you have a chance to work with what you have. And while it may not be up to the usual podcast expectations, you may find that it is deemed somewhat acceptable by other audiences. During today's time, of course, during tomorrow's time, who knows? But that's not just to say that you should accept poor quality. No, not at all. We're not saying that. You should still work to make what you have sound as good as you can, but it might not take too much. For example, Stephen,
instead of recording your podcast using your phone in the middle of your coffee table, try to use something that has a dedicated microphone that you can bring closer to your face, such as earbuds or a headset. Yes, we've made it no secret that we're not the biggest fan of podcasting with a chat headset or with earbuds, but the thing is, with the current conditions, with what you've got, if you're trying to make what you have work, the odds are this is going to sound better than a phone in the middle of a table because you're bringing the microphone closer to you. But another thing, because you're new to this, don't wander. When you're recording, don't go wander, refill your coffee, crack a beer, all these other things. No, stay still so that you're not getting all of that rustling and that noise by walking around. And instead of recording in a large room where there's lots of echo and we hear the echo more than we hear yourself, try to do something a little bit smaller with a little bit of more padding to kill the noise. Maybe your bedroom. Bedrooms often have a big cushion in the middle of it that can work really good for absorbing sound. And still try to record when there are other distractions not around. For example, maybe once the kids go to bed, or when you know that that neighbor that's right next to you in the apartment next to you that is also self-isolating, they're not going to be blaring their radio in the middle of the day. Again, maybe at a time that you know that's not going to happen. And if you do have to use your phone, because let's be honest, not everybody has a pair of headphones or a headset, try to place it as close to you as possible in a stationary position. One of the best tips that we have for this is use like a stack of books. Stack of books, maybe a box. Get creative to bring that phone close to you so that it's not across the room, picking up all of that room noise and that echo. Work with what you've got.
to be clear, we're not saying you should have bad audio. We're just saying that right now you may have an audio.
That's okay. I'm just typing in the chat about how your face needs a snuggle because your jaw's cold. So.
Okay. To be clear, we're not saying you should have bad audio. We're just saying that right now you may have an opportunity to cut corners if you're just starting out and are just looking to do a bit of a project while you're self-isolated. We're still big advocates of good audio, and if you can find a shipment that will arrive on time and you can afford it, definitely get a Samsung Q2U, an Audio-Technica AT2005, or that ATR 2100X that we talked about before. And long story short, Stephen, we were talking about it before the podcast. I have now created Stargate Pioneer Productions Studio B in the house.
You have indeed. And it doesn't have any of those three microphones, but that's for another time. Another way that we think you can make things easier for yourself right now, if you're looking to start a podcast while you're at home, is to focus on the key areas when dealing with the technical aspects of your podcast. If you're not familiar with this, there's a whole bunch of technical aspects involved with creating a podcast, all to do with how you get it on the internet, some things to do with files, a variety of other technical aspects. But we think that you should just focus on the key areas. There's a thing called ID3 tags. Essentially, it's information that is stored in the actual file itself. And there's a whole bunch of different areas that you're supposed to fill out for these ID3 tags. Essentially, again, the description and other information that's attached to that file. But if you're looking just to start a podcast right now, just focus on the key areas. A lot of media hosts that are hosting podcasts have the ability to fill out just a few of those forms, those fields, by using the tool on their site. So it'll just go and automatically encode that, embed that into the file. Just do that. Don't worry about all those extra fields that will maybe help you in other avenues that you might want to pay attention to if you were doing this long term. And also, instead of spending countless hours creating comprehensive show notes that are on the internet for people to delve into and look at all the different aspects of your episode, just stick with a very straightforward post, short summary of what you're talking about in that episode. Don't worry about all of the areas that you might benefit if you were going to have your podcast around long term. There's really no point in spending a bunch of time on the show notes that would elsewise give you good long-term benefit from search engine optimization perspectives. Just focus on getting it out there with a short summary that someone who reads it understands what you're talking about in that episode.
And this last one is one that you're probably going to have to skip back 10 seconds to make sure you heard us say it right. You may not need to spend much money, if any, on media hosting. Okay, so before we continue, we want to refer back to a few minutes ago where we were suggesting you consider if you want to keep podcasting after everything starts to return to normal. If you are 100% sure that you do not want to, then this section applies to you. If you're sure that you don't want to keep podcasting long term, then just choose a media host that works for you functionally and saves you money. There are many options available, and we won't name them all. However, we will still recommend that you not choose SoundCloud. We think that if you're looking to podcast for free, that are better alternatives, you can ask us offline. But if there is even a slight chance that you may want to keep podcasting afterwards, then we think you should follow our traditional media host consideration process. Of course, as always, we recommend you consider the terms of service for anything you sign up for. You should be aware of whether or not you own the rights to your own intellectual property, or if somebody else can make money off of it as well. And before we go on, Stephen, I got to say, you mentioned that my Studio B did not have any one of those 3 microphones that we talked about before.
Yeah.
Studio C does.
Oh.
And yes, I do have a Studio C, which you haven't seen yet.
Fair enough. Let's move on, though, from the microphone to some other art. Threw me off there.
It's a true story. I do have a Studio C.
Let's move on to our final category, which is just some other general tips that we've got for starting a podcast during this time. And the first thing... just writing down the edit point, everybody.
Yeah, we're going to need that.
Let's move on to our final category. Just some other general tips that we've got for starting a podcast during this time. And the first section that we want to mention is we encourage you to share your podcast with others. Even if you're just in a testing phase, communication with others is such an important part of life right now for our mental positivity and everything. So people are isolated, and it's amazing how far just a simple phone call can go. If you're sharing your podcast, though, with somebody like a friend or a family member, you can open up a nice back and forth communication and conversation that might help you maintain that mental positivity. They can give you feedback and maybe do some revisions that they can then reflect on as well. And just keep that open conversation going. It can be huge for everybody. It could be just a fun project / mental break for them as well, because you're giving them something else to focus on. So really, even if you're planning just to, not really go anywhere with this and you're just going through things, we encourage you to share it with somebody else that you trust, because it might be the relief that they need right now as well. Also, maybe you are looking to start this podcast and keep it going long term. Keep in mind that because people have more time, they may be more willing to actually listen to your podcast and provide you feedback right now when they wouldn't usually have time to do so. So it's a really good opportunity for you to not only make them have something to do, but also get in there right now when they're willing to give you feedback.
Yeah, and we talk about having podcasting mentors all the time. There's a lot of places that you can go to in order to get that feedback before you start releasing your show online. And there's a lot of podcasters out there that have a little bit extra time on their hands right now. Maybe they can give you some feedback. Maybe you can ask them for that feedback. And on that note, do not drag your heels on getting started right now. If you're looking to do this for yourself for a break, get yourself going now. Don't wait for 3 weeks from now. Get going now. That's not to say you have to launch right away, but at least get working on the projects. Even if it doesn't materialize to a published product, going through the development process can be a great release for yourself. This is getting your mind to focus on something new to you, and this can be the distraction that you might need in self-isolation. And lastly, most importantly, make sure you're going to have some fun. We all need to have some fun in our lives, especially right now. Make sure that you're having fun when you podcast. If you start working on a podcast and you find you're not having any fun, scrap it. That's fine. At least you tried something new. You need to make having fun your top priority for starting a hobby podcast, especially right now.
In summary, we think that podcasting can be a great tool for people to release a little bit of the stress that they've got right now and keep themselves occupied while trying something new. But they also need to be aware that there are many steps involved with the podcast process. It's not just a matter of push and go. It's not that simple. However, we also think that it's important that people realize that this is really a project that you're doing for yourself. It's important that you decide whether you're wanting to grow your podcast long-term once you've launched it, or if you want to just kind of abandon it once the world continues, goes... Writing down edit point. Or if you want to abandon it once things start to go back to normal. If you are wanting to continue on, we would encourage you not to cut corners. Instead, use the time now to just prep that podcast. Try out some different concepts. Try out different artwork. Use the time now to really just make that launch better. And launch with a usual timeline in mind. And don't rush to get the show going now and realize that you have regrets later because you rushed it early on. We have no reason to not assume that podcast expectations are going to go back to normal when the world starts to return back to normal. People are going to go back to their usual routines, hopefully, and people may start to have those same expectations they had before as all of those big broadcast shows start to resume full quality productions. We're assuming this is the way it's going to go. We don't know for sure, but we think that there's probably good reason to think that things will go back to how they were as far as podcast anticipations go, which is really why, if you are thinking of going long-term, we'd recommend that you sort of follow our usual recommendations and thought processes and best practices that we've talked about in the previous 221 episodes of Better Podcasting, and a lot of the other stuff, of course, that people have talked about outside of this podcast. We know that many podcasters that are listening to the show right now already have a podcast. And as such, well, a lot of what we talked about today may not apply to you directly. But as two hobby podcasters that often find podcasting as a personal motivator for ourselves in our lives, we really wanted to do today's episode with the hope that it helps somebody somewhere during this trying time right now. Hopefully this is going to help someone use podcasting as a bit of a way to get them through this challenging situation that we're currently faced with. And perhaps you know of somebody who's kicked around the idea that you could pass this episode along to and give them that shot in the arm that they need to get things going and use it as an avenue to get them through things. So we just wanted to dedicate this episode to that. We're aware that this episode will have some merits long-term, but overall will be one of those ones that in the long-term isn't reflected on long-term with our podcast, that we don't refer back to 2 years from now. But we wanted to do it right now because we think that it might help some other hobby podcasters.
Indeed.
Let's go ahead, though, and move on to the Better Podcasting Download.
This is the Better Podcasting Download.
SP, can I share a secret with you?
Oh, share a secret with me and our couple of listeners that we have.
Yeah. I'm really excited for today's Better Podcasting Download because it's all about the Rodecaster Pro.
I can't believe you're excited about that. You're usually not as excited about news with the Rodecaster Pro. Pray tell, why are you so excited about this?
Because today we got news that Better Podcasting exclusive. No, it's not true. It's not a Better Podcasting exclusive at all. But
We've never had a Better
I know.
Podcasting exclusive.
We did maybe somewhere, but anyways, no, it's not a Better Podcasting exclusive. But we got news from Rode that they were releasing version 2.1 public beta of the firmware for the Rodecaster Pro. And the reason I'm super excited about this is because we early on had many issues with the Rodecaster Pro. And as we've talked about over the years since this has been out, they've done a lot of things to help alleviate some of those issues and really made it a more appealing unit that we have now found that there are many people that we could recommend this to. But there still were some things that were real showstoppers for people. One of the things that we found was the processing that was involved with the Rodecaster Pro was a little bit restrictive. And in the current beta, they have actually provided the ability to control the individual processing parameters on the Rodecaster Pro. As well, they're offering enhanced metering, something else we had troubles with, and they're offering a new reverb effect, and also SoundPad overdubbing and MP3 export. As well, there are a couple other random things in there, like there is, I think this might have been the last update, but it's mentioned that there is now a preset for the Electro Voice RE20 microphone. Now, the reason I'm super excited about this is because these are all the things that we have, not all of them, but all of these things, well, most of these things are things that we have seen a lot of people talk about within the podcasting space. And it's another example on how Rode, I'll say it, has been far superior to many other vendors with creating firmware to help fill some of these needs that have been asked by the community. If we look at some of the other companies that are doing these sort of digital mixers that are affordable for consumers, you're not seeing the same updates that we've been seeing with Rode. And I think they do deserve credit on that. And I've said that for a while, that because they are coming in and adding features and really embracing the fact that there is essentially, it's being run by a computer and they can do these things, I think it's great, especially because they are things that people are asking for. There's obviously a couple other challenges that some people have had, like preamps and things like that. If it's a hardware issue, that's too bad, but they're doing everything that they can to really enhance the software. And that's really why I'm excited, because again, I think that early on, I said it, I thought they released it too quick, but I think that this is really becoming more well-rounded for a lot of podcasters. And this has me really excited, especially from the fact that they are doing this through a public beta, because they've done betas before. I know that they've done betas before. It's how you do software. You do beta, but it's not been public. And the problem has been, when you've looked at the releases, the Rodecaster Pro has been generally very quick to release the original patch and very quickly after release a supplementary patch, because all of a sudden it got out to the masses and there was problems that they found. And that's pretty usual when things come out of beta to the public. When you open it to a public beta, now you have a lot more people being willing to test it, be the guinea pigs. And so once it rolls into proper production release, these issues might not be there. So I think the fact that they have also opened it up to a public beta, again, shows their willingness to adapt and change right now. So while in the past, early on, I thought that the Rodecaster Pro definitely was overrated. I've said that before. When it was first released, I think that it got way too much praise. I think that they've done a really good job here of continuing to enhance it and make it a more appealing product if the hardware limits match your needs. And there's no signs of them pumping the brakes. That was always a concern. Were they going to just add the multi-track and then call it at that and we never see an update again? No, that's not what it is. They continue to release these. And so it continues to get my support because they continue to support it. So that's why I'm excited, SP. I'm really excited about this. And I think that more and more people are finding the Rodecaster Pro as a well-rounded product for themselves. Again, if the hardware limitations do match their needs.
A couple of things. You mentioned that they have been supporting it since they released it. They never mentioned that they were going to do evolutionary updates to the firmware, to the software. They never did. So when it first came out, you thought that's what it was going to be, and there wasn't going to be any revolutionary changes to it. They've actually managed to do some revolutionary things, so that's great. I wish they would have explained that from the beginning, but regardless, it is what it is. Now, some of the hardware limitations are in the preamps, because you can't change the preamps. You can change the processing, but you can't change the preamps. And also, you cannot change what kind of USB connection that the Rodecaster Pro has. And if I'm not mistaken, and I might be, but I think it is USB 2.0. It is not USB 3.0. So there are some limitations in the hardware of what it is capable of doing based on those two things. However, as Steven said, if this fits what you need in terms of hardware limitations, you got 4 XLR inputs, you've got the 1 cell phone input, as well as the incoming audio. So if that's enough to do whatever it is that you want to do with the Rodecaster Pro, and you don't need to have it on battery power, then this is a decent machine. If you take into account everything that goes into it, the processing and the mix minuses and the recording and everything, it's pretty comparable to what you can get if you piecemeal everything out. However, if you're wanting to do some advanced things with it and the hardware is not supporting what you want to do, then look elsewhere, or perhaps maybe the gear doesn't exist to do what you want it to do yet. And we'll see what happens this fall. We'll see what happens next year. I think we might be in a next year cycle now with the world the way it is right now. So Rodecaster Pro might have a year more under its belt as being the most talked about podcasting hardware since podcasting started.
And just bouncing back to the hardware limitations, like I want to say right now, I'm not using the Rodecaster Pro because the way that I want to have my studio set up is I want the ability that if I do have somebody, if I want to have people recorded separately on my end through concurrent sessions, whether it's Discord or Skype or something else, I want to be able to do that. So on my end, I can record a track individually for every person. This is really helpful in situations where, like, for example, we had somebody come on to do a bit of an interview on Better Podcasting. We wanted to make sure if something went wrong on their end, I had an isolated track on my end. And without getting creative, it's just not really that feasible on the Rodecaster Pro. So for me, the hardware limitations don't meet my needs. Now, if I was to all of a sudden go, okay, I'm going to just accept the fact that I'm just going to do a group Skype call every single time and have one track only, then maybe it would fit my needs. It might fit my needs in that case. But at the moment, the hardware limitations are something that it doesn't meet my needs. So I just wanted to put that out there as a real world example of someone who has been impressed with the Rodecaster Pro updates. And a lot of the cons that I used to have are now solved, but it still doesn't fit my needs.
All right. I'm sure it fits on the needs of a lot of the people that listen to us. I'm sure it's more expensive than a lot of people that listen to this show are willing to spend on equipment as well. So
very good point.
There's a whole range of people and opinions about the Rodecaster Pro.
So there you go. If you've got thoughts about this, get in touch with us through any of the ways. We would love to hear what you have to say about this and whether or not you're excited about these changes. But let's go ahead and move on to the Better Pod Back.
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Pod Back.
All right, today, well, not today. Let me say that again. One sec. This week on Twitter, we asked, due to worldly events, there are many people starting a podcast right now. What is the top piece of advice that you have specifically for these podcasters? And we got quite a few different responses. SP, start us off.
Win Kelly Charles responded with, be truthful. Evil Zombie came back and said, consistency is super important. Let's talk about those two. When Kelly Charles says, be truthful, your integrity is one thing that you have when you start podcasting. And then if you throw that away, if you're not truthful to yourself, if you're not truthful to your audience, you're never going to get that back. I mean, you might get some of it back, but eventually there's just going to be some people that always refer back to the lies that you told at the beginning or the half truths or whatever. So, yep. And consistency is most important. Evil Zombie, yeah, that is true, because people put you in their routine, and just like a TV show, they want to make sure when Monday rolls around that they have certain shows that they can listen to. When Thursday rolls around, they have certain shows that can listen to, that sort of thing. There are people that are going to listen to you way after the fact, though. But consistency still is important, because when people put you in the rotation, then you're going to be able to build that followership of people that do listen consistently each week.
We also had Christian M say, get better over time. You don't have to be perfect on episode 1.
I thought you did. You had to be absolutely perfect. Episode 1. What is this magic that he's talking about?
I've never been perfect in my life. Never at anything. We also had Snag Podcast say, in the beginning, it feels like a lot of hurdles to jump. Take one at a time and just push forward. You'll get to that first recording before you know it.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. I remember when I was doing my first true production episode of Voices of Defiance, and I was so frustrated, because I'm like, what do I do now? Oh my gosh, how do I get this online? How do I get this in, at that time, iTunes? How do I get this in iTunes? And I thought you just uploaded it in iTunes. I didn't know what a media host was back at that point in time. So yeah, there's a lot of little steps to go through along the way. We've gone over them in a lot of the past episodes of Better Podcasting. But if you are having issues knowing what steps to take, come into our Discord, betterpodcasting.com/Discord. Start asking some questions. Not only us, but a lot of our listeners are really experienced podcasters, and they will help you through it.
We also had Geekville Radio say, 1, you will suck at first, but you will get better. Everybody starts somewhere. 2, there's no money in it, at least not at first. 3, make a bullet point outline for each episode. This saves listener time. 4, most importantly, listen to your audience feedback. That was for Geekville Radio.
Now, Seth on Geekville Radio, if you have not listened to him before, has one of the most butter smooth hobby podcasting voices that I've ever heard. And I believe he uses an AT2005.
Nice. We also had Steph Fuccio say, research first to see if anyone is doing your idea first. Doing this can help a new podcaster shape their idea by hearing others' ways of talking about a topic. So thank you, everybody who replied. Really good feedback all around. Earlier in the episode, SP, you mentioned that there was some chatter happening about DAWs, and this all came from this Discord feedback.
Papa Liche said, hi all, question for the group. Which DAW software is recommended for podcasting editing?
And now it's weird. Everybody responded saying, I don't use a DAW. I pay SP his $30,000 an episode consulting fee to edit my show.
It's not $30,000, but it would definitely be a lot. It's just, I take my time with my products, and I want to make sure they sound good. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit more expensive than you might think about. Basically, if you're looking to hire me to edit your show or to produce your show, which I actually don't do on a regular basis, but if you are looking for me, it's going to cost a few $100s per episode. Anyway, Yakko Doctor replied with, whatever one you're most comfortable with. I started with Audacity, but now use Audition. Let's talk about that for a second. There's a lot of other responses as well, but there was this big divide when I first started podcasting in the early 2000s between Audacity and DAWs like Audition, and Audacity and Audition came up quite a bit between the two. It comes down to the way they both work. Now, Audition works as you're able to make the edits, and then it processes it as you're playing, and then as you render. With Audacity, you have to add those effects in as you go. So you have to put the effects in per track unless you actually write some code to do multiple tracks. And there's ways to do that, but there's just two different ways to do it. Doesn't mean that one is better than the other. There are legitimately some people that use Audacity that think it's better than anything else. There's legitimately other people that use DAWs like Movie Studio, like Audacity, that are saying that that is better because of the way it runs. And honestly, I'm more of the Audition Movie Studio path right now. Audacity has its pluses and minuses, but for one thing, it's free. So if you're starting up and you don't have a lot of money, use something like Audacity or Reaper. And a Reaper is like Audition. And it just depends on what you are most comfortable with. Now, I will say that if you are looking around, go through some walkthroughs on YouTube, look at how you want to edit in your mind and see what makes most sense to you, and then just start there. You might end up changing in a few months or a year or something like that, but that's just a good way to start. Anyway, that was Yakko Doctor. Stephen, why don't you take us through the next response?
The Intellectual said, I use Audition. Carlos said, I use Audacity, but I think there's better and easier to learn options. SP said, how many tracks are you editing? That was an interesting question, which we didn't get a response from, but I think that that's a worthwhile question, kind of considering a little bit about what SP just talked about. We had Damien say, I use Hindenburg. I know many people who swear by Reaper. I personally recommend staying far, far away from Audacity. Randy Walker said, our editors on Daily Detroit use Hindenburg. And Steph Fuccio said, I use Audacity for GeoPat's podcast because I used to use it in the language learning classroom, so it was familiar. Kind of wish I had started on Reaper because know quite a few people who swear by it. But now I'm feeling lazy, so probably won't. I like that.
Most podcasters are lazy, actually. So yeah, start with what you got and what you know. Aluron said, one more vote for Audition if you have the funds for the subscription. Now, Audition is a subscription service now. Back in the day, it used to be a couple $100, but now it's subscription by month, and it is expensive. But there are other DAWs like Audition that you can get that aren't subscription. Reaper is one, for example. Stephen John Drew, I don't know who that joker is. We'll have to talk about that later. He said, I prefer Audition over Audacity, but use Magic's Vegas Movie Studio, which is a video program, but does well with audio too. And finally, Newsreel said, I'm going to give Pro Tools a go. I'm about to transition from Mac OS to a PC, so I'll have to park my trusty GarageBand. Actually, Pro Tools was the first DAW that I saw in use. And I think it was Pro Tools 11, I want to say. And things have changed a lot since then.
So do you get the Pro Tools from like Home Depot or Lowe's? Is that where you get Pro Tools from?
Save big money at Menards.
Oh, fair enough. Also, we had Waffles. Actually, I'm not going to do that one.
Switch.
Kind of switch. And let's go ahead and wrap it up with a piece of feedback that came in today that relates earlier or that. And let's wrap it up with a piece of feedback that came in today in the Discord that relates to the earlier conversation that we had in this show. And it was from Jonathan Bloom. He said, quote, how in the heck do I have better audio and video than the CBS Live with Kelly? So much reverb and tinniness. And the sound just felt so dull. No life to it. End quote. There's been a lot of podcasters right now talking about this. I'll admit, I've had some offline conversations. I don't know. It was at least a week and a half ago that I first started to rant about this. But the thing is, again, thinking about the merit of what we talked about earlier, right now people are doing what they can to get things going. Do I think that a high-profile network production should have better than an iPhone audio? Absolutely, I do. I think that if you are a network program and you were not prepared to shove some equipment to your host and get them hooked up with it and you give them a crash course or whatever, keeping in mind that many of these folks are very technically savvy, I think that there's a problem there. I'll give you an example right now. I watch the Walking Dead television show still, and I know there's an after talk show called The Talking Dead, and because of everything, they had to stop doing The Talking Dead. Talking Dead is where they talk a little bit about the week's episode. Well, they did an episode about a week ago of The Talking Dead, and if you don't know this, the person that hosts The Talking Dead is a podcaster. He started out as a podcaster called Chris Hardwick. Well, they did this remote Talking Dead, and you would never, ever, ever had any clue at all that he had any podcast experience at all, because it was very, very terrible, terrible audio. So these are the examples that I go, really? Really? You can't get anywhere remotely close to the levels that have been established by YouTubers and podcasters for a long time as a big production. So obviously I understand they're just trying to get people set up, but I don't know. I don't think that it's that hard to get them a iRig lav mic that at least plugs into that phone.
I've heard a couple of train of thoughts. First of all, the general consensus is they're just doing it to be relatable to other people, because this is how everybody's got to do it right now. And I actually will say no, that's not true, because in TV shows and movies, when they do this sort of FaceTime thing or whatever, and it doesn't matter if it's a sci-fi show or a Hallmark holiday movie, they have good audio when they go back and forth in the final production. So I don't think that's it. I think more to the point is that they don't understand what needs to happen in order to obtain good audio. And they don't understand that audio is more of an issue than video. I mean, everybody wants to do 4K video over their iPhone or their Droid, which can do 4K video. That's great. Or their GoPro or whatever. That is great. It's awesome to be able to do that, because I've been watching some VHS tapes that I recorded like 30 years ago, and the quality for that is just awful. But audio is more of an issue, and they're doing what podcasters have been doing for the last 15 years. They want to start out with their gaming headsets, their laptop microphones. Then they go, oh, I want a USB microphone. They go to a USB microphone, and then they're like, oh, all this reverb. They either go one way or the other. I got to add sound treatment, or I got to go ahead and get more of a professional setup with an audio interface or a Rodecaster Pro or something like that, and some sort of a microphone, whether it be a dynamic cardioid microphone, maybe shotgun microphone if they want it out of the shot. And that's the thing. These people are doing video. They do video for a living, and that's what they're prioritizing at home, because that's what they think they can prioritize. And in my opinion, audio is still more of a deciding factor than video. But that's SP's opinion.
Also, I think that it's worth considering as well that they are just trying to keep out there with people, keep the faces going. And so obviously they're not caring about anything else. But I don't know, the Talking Dead example really got to me. It really got to me because it's like, Chris Hardwick, this is your territory. Come on now. This is where you started. So I don't know.
I mean, even you have a foot in each door, right? So you are prioritizing audio. You have some great audio, but you also prioritize video. You got this great backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
You have the in-ear monitors versus the over-the-ear headphones like I have specifically for the visual.
That's just
so
to show off my gray hair, though, SP, because the headphones would cover my gray hair. That's why I do the in-ear monitors.
You do look like Mr. Fantastic.
But no, I don't know. It's just kind of funny, and there is a lot of conversation happening right now. But I wanted to bring that up because people are noticing. And one of the things that I thought was interesting in that conversation was that someone had cited actually that a regular viewer, I think it was like a mom or something like that. I'm sorry, I don't have the feedback pulled in front of me. I think it was like their mom actually got turned off by the poor quality, and that's not somebody that is, you know, an audio snob like ourselves, right? That was somebody that is just a regular viewer. And I think you're going to have that. I think right now, comedy programs, you can't help but feel a little awkward when there is a joke, but there's no laughter. You're used to seeing that on The Tonight Show. but then Jimmy Fallon delivers a joke and it's just silence. I personally find silence funnier, but it is awkward in some ways as well. So, I think it was interesting feedback, and we'll see. We'll see. Maybe they will call USP to start co-hosting the Today Show.
Oh my gosh. I don't think they could pay me enough to enter into that parade.
If you have had any interesting encounters or anything podcast related that you want to talk about, get in touch with us through any of the ways. Discord's great because as you can see, a lot of good conversation happening there. betterpodcasting.com/Discord. Tweet us at betterpod, or go ahead and just write a letter, send it on a carrier pigeon. Eventually it might show up. Probably not, but it might.
Put it a message in a bottle.
On that note, for episode number 222 of Better Podcasting, I'm Stephen John Drew saying, if you don't watch the video side of things, you're definitely missing that the Gray's coming in strong.
And I'm SP saying, Stephen, why couldn't we have recorded this episode on February 2nd, 2020?
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the Gonna Geek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen John Drew of Gonna Geek Productions. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.
Hairstyles provided by Affinity Salon and Day Spa.
Nice.
That's the Today Show.
Oh, is it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Interesting chat happening right now as well.
Yeah, the equipment was provided and they're just dialing it in. I think it was laziness because they could have spent a lot of time dialing it in to begin with to get some decent audio. And I think it wasn't until it got out and they were berated for having bad audio that they started to want to dial it in. That's just my opinion.
Well, the thing that here's another example of something that really, really frustrated me. There was a clip that I don't actually watch it, but I see clips. I've got the Facebook Late Night with Seth Meyers.
I see dead people. You see clips. I see dead people. Oh, it's a Sixth Sense.
I know.
Reference.
I get it now.
I mean, you're just dropping all these references left and right.
I know. Anyways, Seth Meyers, Late Night with Seth Meyers. He does this segment occasionally. Jokes he can't tell. So he gets two people in, and there's a whole gag behind that, and so they tell the jokes, and they usually do this, obviously in the studio, all of them together. So he sets up the joke, they give the punchline, sort of thing. He's like, they're jokes I can't tell, right? And anyways, they decided to do this as a segment, keeping in mind Seth Meyers as the host. Well, they all were using for all intents and purposes crappy devices. But he looked terrible, he sounded terrible, and they were just 1,000 times better video. I shouldn't say 1,000. They were significantly more better video. Their audio was much better, and I'm sure they were all using the same thing, but he probably had his 5 feet away. He was in an echoey hallway, and it's just like, no, you're the host. You're the host of this. Just like, could you not bring that closer? And I don't know. Is there no way that his staff, which are probably still employed on the payroll, doing other things, couldn't have given him some tips or, checked it out, come in, and they probably were there. They were probably connected, but somehow. And it just bugged me because it's like, here's an example of 3 people facing the same conditions, but your host sounds like crap.
They're all learning. They're learning. And they haven't had to deal with this before. They haven't had the education in the equipment. I get it. I do, because Stephen, like it or not, we both went through this. Mm-hmm. 10 years ago, we went through this.
I know.
Of going from what's a microphone to unless we're a musician that was transferring, into the podcasting space, and neither one of us really was. I mean, I know you have kind of a music and video background, but and then we get to the point where I got to sound better. This sounds terrible, or I don't like the way I sound. And then you start to throw little nuances in as you go along to get even better audio. And is that worth it for them right now? I don't know. They're going to be at home for a month, maybe 2, and then they'll be back in the studio.
The thing to remember, though, is we did it on our own. They have people on their payroll to deal with this stuff that could have offered that education right there and there. And that's the problem that I've got. They got people on the payroll to advise on this stuff. So that's where I get frustrated. But whatever, at least we're getting content. I do find, like I said, I find elements of the at-home stuff even more humorous. I watched a few minutes of I think it was Monday's Conan, and there was God, he told a joke, and it was just absolutely horrendous. And he did a little self-deprecating humor based off the fact that he was at home and stuff, right? And I just thought it was funny. Stephen Colbert did did an episode in a bubble bath in a suit. Hilarious, right? Like, I just thought I just think that
I'm just trying to think of, after a while that would get to me, this wet clothes on your skin, and the bath would start to get cold. And I mean, I don't think I could do a full hour.
I know. I think that was a little segment, because most of these shows started with like a few minute online segment before they kind of put together that, okay, well, we can actually network broadcast this with enough content, sort of thing. But I don't know. I thought it was I thought there was interesting elements, but just some really head scratching things. But whatever. I'm a snob. Call me a snob. That's fine.
Well, because we're both producers, and we've been producing for quite some time. You more so than me. I mean, you do a lot better job at the overall production than I do, partly because of my internet, but partly because, you know the stuff. So yeah, you've got it dialed in, and it's pretty good that you're able to do what you can do with what you got. As far as the people that are paid to do it, yeah, you're right. They should know, but then again, they're used to, big budget stuff. They're not used to small budget at home stuff.
See, even that sounds better. I'm trying to be a smart ass, and even that sounds better than half of it.
Are you on your C920?
No, I took the Procaster. I've moved it away, and I've turned my gain up to almost maximum.
All right. So, well, I mean, if the kids started running upstairs on top of your head, you'd be able to hear them.
Absolutely.
Right now.
But now I'm a professional broadcaster, right?
Well, you could, and some of these people, you've talked about it before. They have their condenser microphone on their desk like 10 feet away from them, and they think that that's what's making them sound good. No, I'm sorry. It's the $10,000 shotgun microphone that's pointed at your face that's making you sound good, and maybe your lab mic that's on your shirt collar that's making you sound right. It is not that condenser microphone that's 10 feet away.
Exactly.
Sorry. Yeah.
All right. Oh, you know what I should have done? I should have put the process bypass on. That would have made it sound crappier. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming on by. Really appreciate that.
Yep.
And we will, when's your next live show? What are you doing
Sunday? It's Sunday night, Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D.
All right. And then next Tuesday, we'll be back with another Better Podcasting Live. If you didn't notice on my Twitter, I've been doing more house stuff for the last week or so. I'll see if I can actually get the, with some of this time, get the actual live stuff on there.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm telling you, 10 episodes, and then we got to get it out there.
I know, that's true. I should just wait. I should just keep it all in the can.
I think you should, if you have time.
No, because I'm going to get backlogged, right? As it is, I think we're at 4, and that's going to be a bit of work. Even though I'm not editing it, I still have to get it all merged together.
Yeah, the intent was to get it out if we could get it out. And
I don't know that they're still on. Your files are up on the drive still, right?
Yeah, I haven't taken them down.
Okay, cool. Because I was thinking I downloaded the first 2, but I don't think I downloaded the last 2. All right, well, bye everybody. Have yourself a wonderful rest of your evening, and let's all chat in Discord and stuff and keep each other entertained, or Twitter or wherever. Bye.